I'm Claire Bennett, 30 years old, and I still remember the sting of those words. On Christmas morning 2 years ago, my parents beamed as they handed my younger sister Haley a tiny gift box. Inside was a house key. When I asked why she was getting a whole house, Dad simply smiled and said, "You'll understand one day." I didn't respond. I just watched as they toasted Haley and talked about new beginnings. Later, when it was finally time to open my gift, Dad's smile faded into something awkward and forced. If you've ever sat quietly while your family overlooked your achievements, hit that like button and stay with me. This story might resonate more than you think. We grew up in a cozy home just outside Minneapolis, Minnesota. 2 daughters, 2 years apart, but to our parents, we may as well have been living on different planets. Haley was the whimsical dreamer. She painted, wrote poetry, dabbled in candle making. She bounced from one project to another with little follow-through, but always with applause from our parents, Doug and Carol Bennett. Then there was me, Claire, the realist. I graduated early from the University of Minnesota with a degree in finance, passed my CPA exams on the first try, and worked my way up to a senior consultant role at a top accounting firm downtown. At 30, I owned my condo near Lake Calhoun, contributed to my retirement fund, and donated to charity each month. But every time I tried to share something I was proud of, Dad would shrug and say, "Numbers are easy, Claire." Meanwhile, Haley's courage in pursuing a passion project, funded entirely by our parents, was hailed as brave and inspiring. I lost count of how many times they covered her rent or bailed her out of credit card debt. At family dinners, I faded into the background while Haley monopolized the conversation with tales of missed opportunities and misunderstood genius. Our parents always leaned in, nodding sympathetically. The Thanksgiving before that Christmas had been especially bitter. I had just landed a huge corporate account that secured my team's jobs and earned me a bonus I could finally use toward my dream of opening a financial literacy nonprofit. I tried to share that moment with my family. Just a little recognition. But halfway through my sentence, Mom cut in, eyes lighting up. "Haley might get her mural featured at the co-op." And just like that, I was invisible again. "Honey, that's wonderful, but Haley's going through something serious right now. Her landlord just raised the rent again, and we need to figure out how to help her." Mom's words echoed in my head all night. Later, as I passed the hallway on my way to the guest room, I overheard Dad softly telling Haley, "Don't worry, we'll work something out. You know we always take care of family." I stood there frozen, wondering, not for the first time, why their definition of family always seemed to leave me standing on the outside. Still, I loved them. I loved Haley. I knew she struggled more than she let on, with anxiety and deep-seated insecurities beneath her artsy charm. And I understood why my parents rushed to cushion her world. Over the years, I had trained myself to find value in my own milestones, career wins, financial independence, personal discipline, rather than begging for their approval. But a small part of me, that stubborn echo from childhood, still longed for them to see me. Not just as the daughter who managed spreadsheets and stability, but as someone who quietly kept the foundation of this family from crumbling. That was why I chose to come back for Christmas last year. I'd considered bowing out, claiming work deadlines, or even flying somewhere warm and distant. But Christmas was sacred to us. The only time when nostalgia seemed to bridge the gap between us all. And I had planned something I believed would finally make them understand what I brought to this family wasn't just financial, but deeply human. Back in October, I visited Mom to help clean out the attic, looking for old ornaments. That's when I discovered the stack of letters, foreclosure notices addressed to Dad. My heart sank. His contracting business had quietly faltered. He hadn't said a word, not even in our regular Sunday calls. The house we'd grown up in, the place that held every birthday candle and crayon drawing, was just months from being taken by the bank. Instead of confronting him, I got to work. I met with the bank, contacted my financial advisor, liquidated stocks, and pulled from savings. I paid off the mortgage in full. It wasn't easy, and it certainly wasn't cheap, but it was done. I had the deed transferred into a family trust. I placed the official documents in a deep red velvet box, tied with gold ribbon, Dad's favorite Christmas colors. I imagined the look on his face. I imagined a moment of clarity when he would realize my practicality wasn't a rejection of passion, but a fierce kind of love. As I packed my overnight bag for the drive back to our snowy Minneapolis suburb, I felt the flutter of nerves. This Christmas, I told myself, would be different. This Christmas, they would finally see me. As I pulled into the driveway that evening, the porch light glowed through gentle flurries. Through the living room window, the Douglas fir sparkled, just like always. Mom still insisted on using the same ornaments we'd had since childhood. A mix of crayon-smudged stars from second grade and delicate glass baubles collected over decades. I sat in my car for a few extra moments, breathing deeply, watching the soft snowfall blur the familiar outline of our house. The gift for Dad was nestled in my overnight bag, its red velvet box perfectly wrapped, holding so much more than paper and ink. This year will be different, I whispered to myself again. This year, I would finally cross that invisible barrier that always seemed to place me just outside the circle of my own family. Haley's old Volkswagen was already parked crookedly near the garage, lightly dusted with snow. Of course she had arrived before me. Even though she lived across the state line now, she probably hadn't had to wrap up a dozen client reports or finish year-end compliance reviews before hitting the road. I caught myself mid-thought and sighed. That kind of comparison never helped. Mom opened the door before I could knock, pulling me into a warm hug that smelled like cinnamon, nutmeg, and something faintly floral. "Claire, we were starting to wonder if you hit traffic." "Just tying up some last-minute work things," I said, brushing snow from my coat. Inside, the house glowed. Garlands curled along the staircase, and flickering candles lit every surface. Haley appeared from the kitchen, glass of mulled wine in hand, her hair now a bright coppery red, styled in loose waves. She wore a green knit sweater and looked like something from a holiday postcard. "Corporate finally let you go, huh?" she teased, giving me a side hug. "I was just telling Mom and Dad about this possible spring gallery showing." "That's great," I said, and I meant it, even as a familiar ache stirred in my chest. I had news too. A promotion to senior analyst likely on the horizon. But I could already tell this wasn't the time. Dinner felt stiff. Dad picked at his food, barely speaking. Mom kept steering conversation back to Haley's art and the brilliant, soulful people she'd met at recent showcases. I responded to questions about my work with careful, concise answers. I knew the routine. They asked because it was polite, not because they were curious. Twice I caught them whispering to Haley when they thought I wasn't paying attention. And once, I saw Haley glance at me and look away with something like guilt. After dinner, we gathered in the living room for our traditional Christmas Eve hot chocolate. I had just come back from the bathroom when I heard Mom murmur, "Should we tell her now?" Dad's voice was low but tense. "Tomorrow, with everything else." Haley looked up and met my eyes. For a flicker of a moment, she looked genuinely sorry. She quickly changed the subject. "Hey, Claire, how's the view from your condo? Still see the frozen lake?" I played along, describing how the sunrise hit the frozen lake outside my condo windows, painting the surface in shades of pink and gold. But my thoughts were spinning. What were they planning? Was this about the foreclosure? Did they somehow know what I'd done? That night, lying in my childhood bedroom, I stared up at the faded glow in the dark stars, still clinging to the ceiling. The air smelled like old books and pine-scented candles. The walls creaked as the house settled. Sounds that once comforted me now seemed like the walls whispering secrets I wasn't meant to hear. I thought back to past Christmas mornings. The year Haley unwrapped a deluxe easel and a set of imported oil paints while I opened a box of winter boots and sweaters for my upcoming college semester. The time Dad spent hours helping Haley install new design software on her laptop while my own, bought for accounting classes, sat unopened in the corner. I wasn't jealous of Haley, not exactly. I loved her. I really did. But it always seemed like her chaos, her struggles, were celebrated as passion. Meanwhile, my stability was met with polite nods. Acknowledgement without warmth. It felt like by choosing a path of structure, I'd chosen to be overlooked, that my success was too clean, too quiet, to be admired. Christmas morning arrived with soft, wintry light bleeding through the curtains. For one brief moment, before I opened my eyes, I felt the innocent thrill of childhood Christmas. But then it all came rushing back. The mortgage notices, the cryptic whispers, the way they had looked through me last night. I dressed carefully. A deep red sweater, fitted black slacks, a touch of mascara, and a spritz of perfume. Not flashy, just composed. My own kind of armor. Downstairs, the scent of cinnamon rolls filled the air. Mom was plating them on the holiday ceramic tray we'd used for decades. Haley sat cross-legged on a bar stool in her usual flannel pajamas, cheeks flushed, eyes bright. Dad stood by the window, staring out at the snowy yard, tension stiff in his posture. "Merry Christmas," I called out with a smile that took effort. They all turned, surprised, as if they had forgotten I was even there. "Oh, Merry Christmas, honey," Mom said quickly. "Coffee?" The morning unfolded with practiced rituals, pastries, carols playing on the old stereo, and coffee cups warming our hands. But something was off. Dad kept checking the clock. Haley couldn't stop smiling. Mom dropped the same spoon twice while stirring the cream. I finally asked, "Is everything okay?" "Of course," Mom replied, far too brightly. "Everything's just perfect." "Just excited for Christmas," Haley said with a giggle she tried to stifle when Dad gave her a look. The Christmas tree sparkled beside a modest pile of gifts. It was smaller than in past years, but I understood. Money had been tight, even if they'd never said it outright. My gaze shifted to the small red velvet box tucked inside my overnight bag. Inside were the mortgage documents. Would it matter? Would it finally show them that being practical didn't mean being cold? That love could look like spreadsheets and wire transfers? We settled into our usual spots. Dad in his worn recliner, Mom curled beside Haley on the couch, and me in the armchair by the frosted window. That's when I noticed it. A new box. Small, wrapped in silver paper, with a perfectly tied bow, resting right at the base of the tree. It hadn't been there last night. My stomach dropped. The tag, written in Dad's unmistakable handwriting, said, "To Haley." Something cold crept through my chest as Haley practically buzzed with anticipation. Whatever this was, I wasn't part of it. "Well," Dad said, clearing his throat, "I think we should start with that one." Mom reached for her phone. "Let me get a video of this." Haley glanced at me, her face alight with excitement. But there was something else, too. Something close to guilt. "You're going to be so surprised," she said. I forced a smile and gripped my coffee mug tighter. "Can't wait." The room seemed to shrink as everyone's focus turned to the silver box in Haley's lap. Outside, snow dusted the windows, picturesque and peaceful, in sharp contrast to the unease tightening in my chest. "Open it slowly," Mom urged, phone raised. "This is special." But Haley never was one for patience. She tore through the wrapping with glee, revealing a small velvet box, like the kind used for jewelry. For a moment, I braced myself, thinking maybe it was Mom's sapphire pendant, the heirloom from Grandma I'd assumed we'd share someday. A wave of sadness welled in my chest, but I braced against it. Jewelry was just a thing, but it wasn't a necklace. Haley opened the box, and nestled inside was a single polished brass key. It gleamed under the twinkling lights, attached to a tiny house-shaped keychain. Her brows drew together in shock, then softened with recognition. "Is this what I think it is?" she whispered. Dad leaned forward, a proud smile spreading across his face. "The little bungalow on Linden Avenue," Dad said softly. "The yellow one you always admired when we'd drive past. It's yours, sweetheart." Mom was crying now, happy tears silently falling as she continued to record the moment on her phone. "We closed last week. It's all done. You can move in anytime." The room tilted slightly as I tried to process what I was hearing. That yellow bungalow was a quaint two-bedroom in one of the most sought-after neighborhoods near Lake Harriet. It was a short walk from cafes, bookstores, and art galleries. I had admired it, too, when it listed a few months back, for nearly $400,000, a price I knew they couldn't possibly afford, especially not with the foreclosure notices I'd found in their attic just 2 months ago. Haley threw her arms around them, laughing and crying all at once. "I can't believe this. I I don't even know what to say. This is so much. Dad smiled through misty eyes. Don't worry about that. We've been planning for a while. You deserve this. A real place of your own. No more worrying about rent or flaky roommates. Just space to focus on your art. I sat motionless in my armchair, the coffee in my mug long gone cold. My sister had just been gifted a home, while I had spent weeks navigating financial red tape to quietly rescue this house from the bank. None of it made sense. Wow, I finally managed, my voice hollow even to my own ears. That's quite a gift. 3 faces turned toward me, as though only just now remembering I was in the room. Haley's expression flickered with guilt, then joy. Mom looked flustered. Dad's expression was unreadable. It's a big step, I added cautiously. How did you even afford a house right now? I thought the business was tight. It was the gentlest way I could allude to the mortgage crisis I'd uncovered. A shadow passed over Dad's face. Finances are complex, Claire, he said, his voice curt. There are things you're not aware of. Haley's been through a lot trying to stay afloat. Mom jumped in, her tone clipped but polished. You have your beautiful condo and stable career. Haley just needs a foundation to build from. And then came the final blow. You'll understand someday, Dad said. That phrase, so casually dismissive, landed like a slap. When you have kids of your own, his voice continued. You'll get it. Sometimes you help the one who needs it more. The message was clear. Haley needed help. I didn't. And apparently, love, like money, was doled out based on perceived need. Haley deserved extraordinary generosity. I did not. She was the one they worried about. I was the one they relied on, assumed would always be fine, without asking. I thought of the foreclosure notices still hidden in my overnight bag upstairs. I thought of the $300,000 I'd spent to keep this house from slipping away, a sum I could have used as a down payment for my own home. But instead, I preserved their security, our memories, their dignity. I thought of all the years I'd swallowed the sting when my promotions were met with polite nods, while Haley's half-finished art projects were hailed as brilliance. Right, I said quietly. Of course. Haley was already dreaming aloud, rattling off paint colors and where her easel would go, what she might plant in the backyard garden, how many people she could fit for a housewarming party. Mom offered thoughts on curtains and furniture. Dad detailed the prepaid property taxes and the new lock installation. I sat silently, a ghost in my own family's celebration. The weight of my gift to Dad, a velvet box holding the mortgage release documents, pressed heavy in my lap. Would he be grateful? Embarrassed? Would it feel manipulative now, overshadowed by this grand gesture to Haley? When can I see it? Haley asked, clutching the brass key to her chest. We can drive over later today if you want, Dad said. The utilities are already on. We had a cleaning crew go through last week. I can't believe you pulled this off without me knowing, she gushed. I couldn't help myself. How long have you been planning this? Mom and Dad exchanged a quick look. We started exploring options around 6 months ago, Mom said, when Haley's landlord hinted he might sell the building. 6 months ago. Right around when the foreclosure notices started arriving. When Dad began looking worn out on our weekly video calls, when he waved off my concern and said everything was under control. I inhaled slowly, choosing my words. Well, it's incredibly generous. Mom turned quickly toward me, misreading my tone. Claire, your gift is coming too. We didn't forget. We got you that professional cookware set for your apartment, since you mentioned wanting to try new recipes. Cookware. Haley got a house. I got sauté pans. The absurdity of it nearly made me laugh. Or cry. Thank you, I said automatically. That'll be very useful. Haley held the key up to the light, examining it. There's something engraved on it, she said, squinting. Dad smiled. It says, Bennett Family Home, because it's yours now, but also part of our family legacy. Family legacy. The words echoed in my head like a closing door. A legacy I had just saved from foreclosure. A legacy they had given, fully, proudly, to someone else. The phrase echoed in my head as I glanced at the red velvet box tucked beneath the tree, holding the deed to the actual Bennett family home. The one they would have lost if I hadn't intervened. The one they had apparently decided was less meaningful than giving Haley a house of her own. "Should we continue with the other presents?" I offered, my voice tight, betraying the strain I was trying so hard to mask. "Yes, of course," Mom said quickly, clearly relieved to change the subject. "There are gifts for everyone." And so the morning continued. I played the part, admiring the professional cookware set with the appropriate enthusiasm. I thanked them sincerely for the scarf and delicate earrings that came with it. Haley unwrapped art supplies, cozy sweaters, and essentials for her new home. Measuring cups, wall prints, even a throw blanket embroidered with her initials. I handed out my own gifts. A rare first edition of Mom's favorite novel, a handcrafted wooden watch I'd sourced from a local artisan for Dad, and a pristine set of pastels I knew Haley had been saving for in her online cart. But through it all, my gift to Dad remained untouched beneath the tree. The final present, still wrapped in elegant gold paper with a crimson bow. It sat there, conspicuous in its silence. As the pile of torn wrapping paper grew, I debated whether I should invent a reason to take it back. Say I forgot to pack it, or that I'd send it later. But something inside me, pride, hurt, maybe the desperate need for truth, kept me still. I waited, smiling politely, sipping fresh coffee while the morning wore on. Mom collected discarded ribbons for her crafting box, just like she did every year. Haley tapped notes into her phone about appliances and furniture, pausing to ask questions like, "Is there a garbage disposal?" And "Does the house come with a washer and dryer?" I nodded, laughed, answered questions, smiled. But inside, I felt like I was drifting further from this family I tried so hard to belong to. It was like watching a holiday special on TV, one where the main character realized she'd never really been part of the story. Finally, only one gift remained, my gift. Its metallic wrapping shimmered under the lights. "Looks like we saved the best for last," Mom said, nodding toward it. "That one's for you, Robert." From Claire. Dad, who'd been helping Haley browse paint swatches on his tablet, looked up with faint surprise. "Oh, I thought we were finished." He set the tablet aside, shifting to the edge of his recliner. "Must be something special from my successful daughter," he said with a grin. But behind it, I saw something else flicker in his expression. Uncertainty, maybe even fear. Did he suspect what I'd discovered? Was he bracing for what I might reveal? "It's nothing, really," I said quickly. Automatically, my lifelong instinct to downplay my own contributions already kicking in. Dad shook his head gently. Now. Don't sell yourself short. Your gifts are always thoughtful." He reached for the box. His movements were slow, deliberate, untangling the gold bow, peeling away the tape to preserve the wrapping paper, like he'd done since childhood. A tradition born from years of frugality and a habit he never quite let go. Normally, it would have been endearing. But today, the methodical unwrapping had my pulse pounding in my ears. I sat perfectly still, holding my breath. Finally, he opened the black box inside. His face changed in an instant, pleasant curiosity fading into blank confusion. He pulled back the tissue paper and stared at the neatly stacked documents inside. At the top sat the mortgage satisfaction letter, followed by the deed, clean, clear, and fully paid. His smile vanished. His hands stilled. "What is it?" Mom asked, leaning in. "Claire, what did you give him?" Haley asked, setting down her phone, her voice tinged with real curiosity for the first time all morning. I swallowed and forced myself to speak. "It's the mortgage. To this house. It's paid in full." Silence. Thick and immediate. Even the soft instrumental carols seemed to evaporate from the air. Dad lifted the letter, his fingers trembling ever so slightly. He read, then reread. "How?" His voice trailed off. "I found the foreclosure notices," I said calmly. "Back in October, when I was helping Mom look for the photo albums in the attic. I saw everything. The house was 3 months from being repossessed." Mom gasped. Her hand flew to her mouth. "Foreclosure," she whispered, turning toward him. "Doug, what is she talking about?" Dad looked pale, the color draining from his face. He suddenly looked a decade older. "Carol, I was going to tell you," he said softly. I I was trying to handle it. By buying Haley a house when you couldn't even save this one? The words slipped out of me before I could stop them, sharper than I intended. But the hurt had been building for years. Haley's eyes widened. Wait, what? Dad, is that true? Were we losing this house? Dad didn't answer right away. He placed the documents carefully on the coffee table, like they might shatter. Finally, he said, the business has been bleeding for a while. Supply costs, the pandemic. I used our retirement funds to keep it going, but it wasn't enough. We fell behind on payments. And you didn't tell me? Mom's voice cracked, soft but raw. You let me decorate for Christmas while the bank was circling? I didn't want to worry you, Dad replied. I thought I could fix it. Quietly. By buying me a house? Haley asked, stunned. How does that even make sense? Dad glanced at her, then at me, then dropped his eyes to his hands. The bungalow was significantly less than what we owed on this house. The plan was to sell this place before the foreclosure finalized, pay off what we could, and use the bungalow as our fresh start. He paused, guilt thick in his voice. You would have let us stay with you until we got back on our feet. The pieces slid into place like a puzzle I wished I'd never started. My stomach turned. So, the house wasn't really for Haley, I said slowly. It was for all of you. A backup plan. Haley sank back against the couch cushions. The light in her face extinguished. You weren't giving me a home. You were making me your safety net. It wasn't like that, Mom jumped in, but even she didn't sound convinced. We were helping you, while also helping ourselves. We would have told you the full situation once we were settled, Dad added. But now it doesn't matter, he said, motioning to the documents still resting on the coffee table. Because Claire paid off the mortgage. He looked at me again, his expression a swirling mix of astonishment, shame, and raw relief. This was over $200,000. How? I liquidated some investments, I replied quietly. Used most of my savings. Took a small loan against my 401k. I'll pay it back. Dad sat back slowly. You sacrificed your own financial future. Yes? Why didn't you just tell us you knew? He asked. There was a flicker of defensiveness behind his words. Why go behind our backs? I met his eyes without flinching. Would you have let me help if I had told you? Or would you have said not to worry? That you had it under control, like you always do? That I should focus on my own life? He didn't answer. He didn't have to. We both knew the truth. Haley stared at the brass key in her hand, the one she'd held so tightly just moments ago. It no longer looked like a gift. It looked like a burden. So, what happens now? She asked, her voice small. Is this still my house? Was any of this real? No one spoke right away. The perfect Christmas morning had collapsed. All the secrets, the favoritism, the quiet resentments, dragged into the open like broken ornaments on the floor. I think, I said finally, breaking the silence, we need to have an honest conversation. I looked around the room, at my parents, at Haley, about money, about trust, about how this family really works. If you've ever felt unseen in your own family, hit subscribe and stay with me, because what happened next changed everything. Dad nodded slowly, the mortgage papers still clenched in his hands. Yes, he said, his voice low and rough with emotion. I think we do. The silence that followed felt endless. Outside, snow continued to fall in soft sheets, muffling the world beyond our windows, like nature itself was protecting our little storm from the outside. The lights on the tree blinked rhythmically, casting soft shadows across 4 faces, all struggling to recalibrate. Mom was the first to move. She stood slowly, movements stiff, her face pale. I need tea for this conversation, she muttered. Strong tea. I'll help, Haley said quickly, leaping up, eager for any excuse to exit the weight of the room. That left Dad and me, the documents between us on the coffee table, like a years-long confession in printed form. How long has the business been struggling? I asked, my voice low. Dad rubbed his face with both hands. Seriously? 3 years. But I should have seen it coming long before that. I just didn't want to believe it. And you never told me? I asked. Dad, I work in finance. I could have helped before it got this far. You're my daughter, Claire, not my financial advisor, he said, a familiar flicker of his old stubborn pride flashing in his tone. It wasn't your burden to carry. But it was Haley's, I said, too sharply to hide my hurt. He exhaled slowly. That wasn't our finest plan. We convinced ourselves we were helping her, and helping ourselves. 2 birds, 1 stone. Before I could respond, Mom and Haley returned with a tray of tea and mismatched mugs. No one reached for the plate of untouched cookies. All right, Mom said, sitting stiffly at the opposite end of the couch from Dad. Let's put everything out on the table. Robert, start. How bad is it, really? Dad looked around, meeting each of our eyes before answering. The business is bankrupt, he said. I've been floating it with personal funds, but I can't anymore. We've got about $3,000 left in checking. No retirement savings. Until this morning, we were 90 days from foreclosure. Haley's voice was barely a whisper. And the bungalow? How did you buy that? Dad hesitated, then answered. It was a foreclosure itself, listed for $190,000. I used a loan against my life insurance policy for the down payment. The mortgage is less than what we were paying here. So, you were planning to lose this house? I asked. Move in with Haley, and then what? If you've ever felt unseen in your own family, hit subscribe and stay with me, because what happened next changed everything. Start over, Dad said simply. Downsize the business to just me. No employees. Focus on small, manageable jobs. Build it back gradually. While living with me? Haley said, her voice flat. For once, there was no trace of her usual warmth. It would have been temporary, Mom jumped in quickly. A year at most? Haley shook her head in disbelief. And when exactly were you planning to tell me this part of the arrangement? After I'd moved in? After I painted the walls and planted herbs in the backyard? After I started thinking of it as mine? We were going to tell you today, Dad said. Once the initial excitement settled, we thought it would be easier for you to see it as your home first, with us as guests. Manipulative guests, I muttered before I could stop myself. That's not fair, Claire, Mom snapped, more sharply than I'd heard her speak in years. We were drowning. We made the best decision we could. By lying to everyone? The question didn't need an answer. It just sat there, heavy and raw. Mom's face faltered. We didn't lie, she said. We just didn't tell the whole truth. I turned toward her. And you, Mom? You really didn't know about the foreclosure? The business? Any of it? Her eyes flicked to Dad, then dropped to her tea. I knew things were tight, she said softly. But not how bad. Robert handles the finances. He always has. Margaret, Dad began, but she held up a hand. I haven't been completely honest either, she said, her voice gaining edge. I've been dealing with health issues I didn't tell any of you about. Severe migraines, dizziness. I've seen 3 specialists in the past year. Dad looked stunned. What? When? How did I not know? I scheduled appointments while you were at work, paid in cash so they wouldn't show up on the card statements you track. She gave a bitter, humorless laugh. I guess we've all been keeping secrets. Haley placed her mug down with a sharp clink, the liquid sloshing slightly. This is insane. Our entire family is a mess of lies. Mom's hiding health issues. Dad's hiding financial ruin. You 2 plan to move into my house without telling me, and Claire's been paying off mortgages behind everyone's backs. I was trying to help, I said defensively. By going behind everyone's back, Haley shot back, just like they did. The words stung, not because she was entirely wrong, but because for a moment, I couldn't tell whether I'd become part of the solution or just another part of the pattern. The accusation stung, because it wasn't wrong. Hadn't I done the same thing? Kept secrets? Chosen silence instead of honesty? My actions, however well-intended, mirrored the very thing I resented. Why didn't you just tell me what you found? Dad asked again, his voice gentler now, but echoing the same question I'd been asking myself for weeks. I took a breath, searching for something unvarnished and real. Because I knew you wouldn't accept my help. You never do. You and Mom have spent my entire life telling me how capable I am, how I don't need help, how I always land on my feet. But Haley? She gets help, support, money, reassurance, endlessly. If I had come to you about the foreclosure, offered to help, you would have told me to keep my money. You would have said you had it under control. Is that so wrong? Dad asked quietly, wanting my daughters to be strong and independent. But you only want one of us to be that way, I said. The words had been building in me for years, and now they poured out. Haley gets rescued. I get expected. Do you even know what that feels like? Watching you bend over backward for her while treating everything I accomplish like it's just standard? That's not fair, Mom said, her voice cracking. You're right, it's not, I replied. When was the last time you celebrated one of my promotions? Or asked if I needed help with anything at all? You assume I'm fine, always. But being proud of me isn't the same as being supportive. Dad opened his mouth to speak, but before he could, Haley spoke for the first time in a while. She's right, she said quietly. You do treat us differently. Mom and Dad turned to her, visibly stunned. You've always acted like Claire doesn't need anything, Haley continued, like she's self-sufficient and unshakable. Do you know what that did to me? It made me feel like I had to be the one who needed help just to get your attention. I blinked. This was not what I expected. I thought you liked being the center of everything, I said, honest confusion in my voice. That you played into it. Haley shook her head. I've been jealous of you for years, of your job, your confidence, the way you don't need anyone's approval. I always felt like I had to struggle just to be noticed. That can't be true, Mom whispered, but even she didn't sound sure. It is, Haley said simply. And they don't favor me, Claire. She looked straight at me. They depend on me needing them. That's not the same thing. They worry about me, Haley said softly. That's not the same as respect. The room went quiet. Her words lingered in the air like smoke, sharp and inescapable. Had we all been reading this family dynamic wrong for years? Dad cleared his throat, his voice low. I think your mother and I have made some serious mistakes, he said slowly. We thought we were responding to each of you according to your needs. But maybe we were just reinforcing patterns and hurting everyone. And lying to each other in the process, Mom added quietly. She reached across the space between them, resting her hand on his. Despite the tension earlier, there was a tenderness in that gesture, an acknowledgement of shared fault. All of us, she whispered. So what now? Haley asked, holding up the brass house key. What happens with the bungalow? With this house? Dad looked at the mortgage papers still resting on the table, then at me. Claire saved this home, he said simply, at great personal cost. The least we can do now is be honest with each other. It was a start, but the air between us was still thick with questions. Could Dad rebuild the business? What was going on with Mom's health? What did Haley's house mean now? Would any of us ever fit back into our old roles? The responsible one, the struggling one, the protector, the peacekeeper? Had all of that just shattered? I glanced at the faces I'd known all my life. For the first time, I wondered if I was truly seeing them clearly. The conversation drifted from the living room to the kitchen, where Mom insisted we needed food to process something this heavy. There was something grounding in the ritual. Leftovers from the fridge, Dad automatically setting the table. These motions, unchanged by truth, hinted that maybe some foundation still held. Haley and I sat at opposite ends of the kitchen island, unusually quiet. Between us lay the house key, no longer a joyful symbol, but something more complicated. I want to understand what really happened, I said as Mom placed warm plates in front of us. The full truth. No more protecting us. Dad nodded and took a deep breath, his appetite clearly gone. It started before the pandemic. Bigger firms from Boston expanded into our region. They could offer lower bids because they had deals with suppliers. I couldn't compete. He told us how he cut his margins, worked longer hours, laid off staff until it was just him and 2 others. Then COVID hit, he said. Projects stopped for months. When they resumed, materials were double the price. I took out a loan just to stay afloat. Then a second loan, Dad continued. I kept thinking if I could just weather the storm, things would turn around. But then the supply chain fell apart. I couldn't finish jobs on time. That meant late penalties, and clients started walking. Why didn't you tell me any of this? I asked quietly. During our Sunday calls? Dad gave a hollow laugh. What kind of father wants to admit failure to his daughter? Especially when that daughter happens to be an expert in exactly what I was failing at. Financial planning. I could have helped, I said, before it got this bad. He looked at me gently. Would you have accepted my help if our roles were reversed? The question gave me pause. Would I have? Or would my pride have kept me silent too? Mom cleared her throat. Well, while we're being honest, I should tell you more about my health. She told us about the migraines, how they'd grown more frequent, how they left her disoriented for hours. 3 neurologists, multiple tests, no diagnosis. I've been taking prescription meds just to function. They help, but they leave me foggy. I didn't want to worry you all. Do they think it's serious? Haley asked, her tone softened by concern. They're not sure, Mom admitted. The latest doctor wants me to go to Boston for more advanced testing. Tests we can't afford, Dad added quietly. The puzzle pieces were clicking into place. Dad's financial secrecy, Mom's silence, even the desperate plan with Haley's house. They hadn't just been overwhelmed, they'd been afraid. My turn, Haley said suddenly. We all turned to her. I haven't been honest either, she said. That gallery showing I mentioned? It fell through months ago. I've been working at a coffee shop for over a year, just to make rent. I haven't sold a piece in 18 months. But you always talk about your projects, your artist friends. Mom started, clearly confused. Haley gave a small, sad smile. Because that's what you expect from me, to be the free spirit, chasing her passion. I didn't want to admit I'm almost 32 and might have failed at the only thing I've ever truly wanted. Dad blinked. So, you've been struggling more than we knew. Haley nodded. Which makes your plan to move into my house even more ridiculous. I can barely support myself. How could I support you? The truth settled between us like snowfall. Quiet, dense, undeniable. One by one, our carefully kept facades had crumbled. We'd all been performing, pretending to be strong, successful, unbothered, hiding our fears to protect each other and ourselves. And you, Claire? Mom asked gently. What truths have you been keeping from us, besides paying off our mortgage? I stared down at my plate, the food barely touched. I considered brushing it off with something easy, but instead, I took a breath. I guess I've been pretending your opinions don't matter to me, I said quietly, that I don't care if you're proud, that I'm fine on my own, because that's what everyone expects. I looked up slowly, eyes stinging. But the truth is, I've spent my whole adult life wanting your approval, hoping you'd be as excited about my promotions as you are when Haley gets invited to paint a mural for a cafe. Mom reached across the table and gently took my hand. Oh, Claire, I'm not saying this to make you feel guilty, I added. I just want to be honest. I've been jealous of Haley's attention, while apparently she's been jealous of the respect I get. We've both been missing what the other had, Haley murmured. Our eyes met. There was pain there, but understanding too. The irony, Dad said, shaking his head, is that your mother and I genuinely thought we were doing what was best for both of you. Supporting Haley's creativity because it seemed more fragile. Celebrating your independence because we thought that's what you wanted. We never meant to make either of you feel less seen, Mom added, her voice soft. We love you both so much. Just in different ways. Maybe that's the problem, I said. Loving us differently instead of simply loving us equally. The conversation spilled into the afternoon. Years of unspoken assumptions, misinterpreted roles, and quiet resentment laid bare. There were flare-ups, yes, but also a strange peace in finally airing what had festered. For the first time, it felt like we were a family, not characters in a long-running play. As dusk began to settle over the snowy yard, Dad cleared his throat. About the houses, he said. Claire has saved this one, and I can't thank you enough for that. But the bungalow still has a mortgage, one we likely can't afford. We could sell it, Mom offered. Use the money to rebuild our savings. Maybe take care of my medical testing. It was supposed to be Haley's gift, Dad said, glancing at her. Even if the plan was flawed. Haley looked at the key still sitting on the island. She touched it once, then slid it gently toward Dad. I think I need to do things on my own now, she said. Not with a house I didn't earn. Are you sure? Mom asked. Haley nodded. For once, I want to rescue myself. I looked at the numbers forming in my head, then nodded too. Let's rebuild. Together. The housing market around Lake Harriet is strong, I said. Since the bungalow was a foreclosure, you could likely sell it for more than you paid. That would give you some breathing room. And the business? Dad asked, his eyes meeting mine, not with defensiveness, but with something closer to trust. We can look at the books together, I offered. See if there's a way to restructure, or if it makes more sense to wind it down and maybe start something smaller, more specialized. I'd appreciate that, he said, the words clearly not easy for him to say, but sincere. As we continued discussing the next steps, I felt something shift. A tension that had quietly defined our family for years had finally broken. The walls of secrecy and carefully crafted roles had collapsed. We were, for the first time in a long time, just people, flawed, honest, and trying. There was grief in that clarity, but also hope. I think, Mom said, standing to make a fresh pot of coffee, this might be the most honest Christmas we've ever had. No one disagreed. 6 months later, we gathered again, this time around the same dining table, but in a completely different season. Summer's green had replaced winter's starkness, and the light pouring through the open windows felt softer, more forgiving. Mom's garden, planted as part of her recovery, bloomed just outside. After extensive tests, her doctors diagnosed her with vestibular migraines. It wasn't easy, but it was treatable. With the right medication and a focus on gentle routines, she was finding her balance again, literally and emotionally. Dad moved through the kitchen with a quiet steadiness I hadn't seen in years. The business had officially closed in March, a painful but ultimately healthy decision. With my help, he'd landed a position as a construction manager at a mid-sized development firm. Regular hours, good benefits, less pressure, more peace. How's the new apartment? I asked Haley as we set the table side by side. She smiled, and for once, it reached all the way to her eyes. It's small, but it's perfect, and fully within budget. After finally facing the reality of her struggling art career, Haley had made a bold shift. She used her creative background and her coffee shop hustle to land a job as a marketing coordinator at a local brewery. She still painted, but now it was for joy, not survival. And they actually value my artistic eye, she said, grinning. I'm designing their seasonal beer labels. That's fantastic, I said, and meant it. The old competition between us had softened into something warmer, mutual pride, mutual respect. And the house, our family's home, stood stronger than ever, not just structurally, but emotionally. The foundation had been cracked, but we rebuilt it, together. The living room had been repainted in a lighter shade of sage, soft and warm. Family photos lined the hallway, some newly framed, some dusted off after years in storage. There were even a few of Haley and me as kids, before expectations and comparisons had wedged us apart. We gathered around the dining table, laughter coming easier now. Conversation flowed without performance. No one was pretending. No one was protecting anyone from the truth. We had learned, the hard way, that secrets only deepen the cracks they're meant to cover. I have some news, I announced as we finished the last bites of grilled salmon. I've been offered a promotion at the firm, senior financial advisor. I'll be managing my own portfolio. Claire, that's incredible, Mom said, her face lighting up with genuine pride. They want me to specialize in family financial planning, I added, helping families navigate multi-generational finances. Apparently, I bring personal insight to the role. Dad chuckled. I'd say that's an understatement. You saved your own family from financial ruin. We saved ourselves, I said softly, by finally being honest with each other. Haley set down her fork. Speaking of honesty, she said, can I ask you something? I nodded. Are you really okay with how everything turned out? You spent so much to save this house. And now Dad and Mom are steady again. I've got my own footing. But what about you? Have you been able to rebuild your savings? There was no edge in her voice. Only concern. I thought for a moment. Financially? I'm getting there, I said. The promotion helps. But honestly, what I've gained in other ways has meant more than any balance sheet. For years, I measured my worth in this family by what I accomplished. Degrees, jobs, bonuses. I thought if I was successful enough, maybe you'd all see me the way you saw Haley. As someone worth investing in, emotionally. Mom's eyes softened. We always valued you. I know, I said gently, but we got trapped in patterns. You connected with Haley through emotion. Dad and I spoke in numbers and results. We were all trying to love each other, Haley said, just not in ways the others could hear. Dad nodded slowly. I always thought I was showing you respect, by not interfering, by trusting you. I thought I was protecting all of you, I said, by handling things myself. But really, Dad added, we were just reinforcing the walls. After dinner, we moved out to the back porch. The evening was warm and quiet, fireflies beginning to flicker across the yard as dusk settled in. Over the past 6 months, we'd established a new tradition. Regular family dinners where we practiced being honest, even when it was uncomfortable. I sold the bungalow, Dad said as we sank into the porch chairs. Final closing was yesterday. Though we'd all known it was coming, the finality of it still carried weight. How do you feel about it? I asked, turning to Haley. She paused before answering. Relieved, actually. That house represented a lot of things. Dad's financial secrets, my self-doubt, the way our family used to slap Band-Aids on problems instead of really facing them. It feels clean now, resolved. The proceeds helped, Dad added. Covered the last of the debt on this house and left us with a modest cushion. Nothing extravagant, Mom chimed in, but enough to restart our retirement fund. And we've set aside an emergency fund, for all of us. She gave me a knowing smile. It was another new tradition. Approaching family finances with transparency instead of pride or silence. We'd even drawn up a simple agreement, nothing formal, just guidelines on how we'd handle money issues moving forward. Not because we didn't trust each other, but because we finally understood how easily silence could be misread. As night fell and we gathered our things, Haley grabbed her tote and waved goodbye before heading to her new apartment across town. I lingered a few extra minutes, enjoying the quiet hum of the porch light, the scent of fresh herbs from Mom's garden. Dad stepped beside me. Claire, he said gently, I never properly thanked you. Not just for the money, but for the truth. For forcing us to face everything. I didn't do it gracefully, I admitted. There were better ways to bring it up. Maybe, he said, but I'm not sure we would have listened. Sometimes it takes a shock to break through denial. He hugged me then. Not the polite shoulder pat kind we'd done for years. A real hug, steady and sure. I've always been proud of you, he said quietly. But now, I actually understand you. And that means more. On the drive home, I thought about those words that had once wounded me so deeply. You'll understand someday. Dad had been wrong about what I'd come to understand. It wasn't about why one child got more than the other. It wasn't about unequal gifts. What I came to understand was something deeper, that families are imperfect systems held together by imperfect people, that love doesn't always arrive in the right words or gestures, that honesty, messy, painful, unvarnished honesty, is the only foundation strong enough to rebuild on. The mortgage papers, now tucked into a drawer in Dad's office, weren't just a symbol of financial stability. They had become something else entirely, a reminder of the emotional renovation we'd all undergone. By saving the house, I had inadvertently helped rebuild the home inside it. Connection, trust, truth. As I pulled into the parking garage at my apartment, my phone buzzed with a group text. Haley had sent a selfie, her small, cheerful apartment behind her, a paintbrush in hand. Art for joy, not for rent money, the caption read. We'd started checking in regularly, something we'd never done growing up. Real conversations, no roles, no competition, Understanding someday had come sooner than expected, and with it, the real gift of that Christmas. The truth that finally allowed us to love and be loved as we truly are. If you've made it this far, thank you for listening to my story. I didn't share it to be praised or pitied. I shared it because I know I'm not the only one who's ever felt unseen in their own family. If something I said today struck a chord with you, I'd love to hear from you in the comments. What would you have done in my place? Would you have spoken up sooner or stayed quiet like I did for so long? Your perspective matters. And honestly, it would mean a lot to know I'm not alone in navigating these complicated family dynamics. And if you're in a place right now where you feel like the strong one, the silent one, or the one no one ever worries about, please take this as your sign to check in with yourself. Just because you can carry the weight doesn't mean you should have to do it alone. Speak your truth, even if your voice shakes. Ask for help. Set boundaries. Be honest, especially when it's hard. The most valuable gift we can give each other and ourselves is clarity, compassion, and the courage to rebuild something stronger. I promise, it's never too late to start.